Pro wrestling fans, sad news. Paul Orndorff has passed away. I guess his middle name was Parlett. Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful, as we know him. And he was wonderful. He was a wonderful athlete, wonderful professional wrestler, a guy who took his physique seriously, took his wrestling seriously, took his athletics seriously. He was featured at the first WrestleMania and the first WrestleMania main event. Unfortunately now, both Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper, who were the opponents for Hulk Hogan and Mr. T at the WrestleMania 1 main event, they're both gone now. Paul Orndorff also had before even getting to the WWF at the time, he had a great career. I believe he was NWA World Tag Team Champion with Jimmy Superfly Snuka. Imagine those two guys together. I haven't seen video of them as a team. I'd like to find those videos, if they exist, of Orndorff and Snuka. I believe they were NWA Tag Team Champions, World Tag Team Champions. Correct me if I'm wrong. First thing I heard about Paul Orndorff was he was in the Georgia Championship Wrestling area, and he was the national heavyweight champion, which was a very highly respected territory title at the time. That was the #1 title in Georgia, and the champion would always get matches with the world champion. And there was some type of storyline where Orndorff was like the dominant babyface Georgia national heavyweight champion, and he gave up his title in order to concentrate on the NWA World Championship held by Ric Flair. And then I believe they went to a 60-minute draw. So that must have been 1982. So imagine an Orndorff-Ric Flair 1982 match in the Omni. You know, I wish at least we had videos of all these matches, or can make a time machine and go back and go to these matches. I remember reading a wrestling magazine and pictures of Orndorff and Flair tearing into each other for an hour in the Omni, and imagine what a great match that would have been to see live. For the people that were there live, they had a great time, I'm sure. Then the next thing was that Orndorff somehow got the title back. I don't know if he won a tournament, but he was defeated by Killer Tim Brooks, and then Killer Tim Brooks actually sold the title to Larry Zbyszko, and that was, you know, a whole other thing, but just the guys involved in that storyline: Larry Zbyszko, Paul Orndorff, Killer Tim Brooks. Orndorff did not stick around, I believe, for the 20-man tournament at the Omni to crown a new national champion. He was kind of on his way. I believe he did a brief stay over in St. Louis, just a couple of matches there, if I'm not mistaken. And then he went to WWE in New York, or WWF at the time. And he came in, I believe, at the same TV taping or close to it that Roddy Piper did. Hulk Hogan had just gotten there a week or two earlier. And Orndorff and Piper and another guy, Dr. D. David Schultz, were all kind of being positioned as the enemy heels, along with the great Bobby Heenan as a manager of different wrestlers. But all these top heels from the territories were being assembled to take on Hulk Hogan. And I think even before WrestleMania 1, Orndorff and Hogan, I believe, had some matches for the title. And, of course, Orndorff turned babyface in the fallout of WrestleMania 1. Him turning babyface, you could definitely make a statement, was kind of the cliffhanger of WrestleMania 1, because WrestleMania 1 ended with that tag team match with Cowboy Bob Orton accidentally hitting Mr. Wonderful with the cast. Piper and Orton walking away from Orndorff. Orndorff confused. Mr. T trying to shake the hand of Paul Orndorff. You know, and they carry this into May with a Saturday night's main event where Paul Orndorff, you know, turning babyface in that Saturday night's main event was a money program. And Orndorff was over huge as a babyface for about a year and 2 or 3 months, from, you know, basically from April, May of 85 to, I believe it was July, August of 86. But Orndorff, I think people forget, had a very huge babyface run in 1985 into mid-86. The Wrestling Classic, you can see, really an unappreciated pay-per-view. The first pay-per-view that you could actually watch in your own home, not on closed-circuit TV, but in the privacy of your own home, as they say. Orndorff and Tito Santana had a great babyface versus babyface match. right there at the Wrestling Classic I think it was the first or second round. Moving forth, Orndorff, the summer of '86, him and Hogan had a long-term storyline. They played it out over 3 or 4 weeks, which at the time, you didn't have Raw, you didn't have all these shows, you had a weekly syndicated 11 a.m. wrestling show that was still trying to get you to buy a ticket for your local venue. Pay-per-view was not dominant yet. I mean, pay-per-view didn't get dominant until maybe 88, 89. So this is 86. And I remember watching this unfold with cousins of mine that were not, huge wrestling fans, but they were just excited to watch Paul Orndorff and Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd. But I, being a little more informed and intelligent about the ways of professional wrestling, and probably all things, I knew that Orndorff was going to turn on Hogan. So I'm just waiting for it. And then Orndorff, the DQ comes, and Orndorff lifts up Hogan's hand because he had been short-arming him the whole time, and he delivers a devastating clothesline. The cameraman or the director for WWF screwed up, and for some reason they're showing King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd on camera at the exact moment when Orndorff connects with the clothesline. I never understood that fallacy. But Orndorff follows up, I believe, with a nice pile driver, welcomes Studd and Bundy and Heenan into the ring as his new brethren, and there you go. We're off to the races with the second heel run of Paul Orndorff in the WWF. And the second heel turn, or the second heel run, I should say, was white hot in a good way. Capitol Center, Landover, Maryland, October 1986. I go to the show. I'm pretty damn young, but I actually assembled a sign with a Hulk Hogan doll with a noose tied around its neck, tied to a sign of a poster board with a poster taped onto it of Paul Orndorff doing like the most muscular pose. And I put the rope of the noose on this Hogan doll into Orndorff's hands on the poster. So it looks like Orndorff is noosing Hulk Hogan. So I was definitely an Orndorff fan. I would say that Orndorff is the wrestler, and this angle was the storyline that really got me to be a heel cheerer, at least against Hogan at the time, which I stayed through the Andre feud and so forth. So Orndorff was very influential. I wouldn't say that he was the first of the cool heels, because most fans were cheering for Hogan by far, but you may have seen or remembered, I think the first time that anyone did the photo finish of the cage escapable, I should say, Orndorff versus Hogan on a Saturday night's main event, and they're both escaping the cage, and I think Orndorff even claimed, that he really did win, and they had to manipulate the tapes to make it seem like Hogan and him tied. But in any event, the show that I saw at the Capitol Center was also a cage match, and they did a similar finish, except Orndorff was going through the door and Hogan was going over the top. So all these wonderful things. We get into 1987, maybe a mistake. I mean, maybe they had just done as much as they could with Paul Orndorff in the WWF. But Orndorff was turned babyface again, and it was really kind of a superfluous way. Him and Rick Rude were both in the Bobby Heenan family, and Rick Rude, who had a great physique as well, and rest in peace, Rick Rude, but Bobby Heenan started saying that Rick Rude had the best body in pro wrestling, and Paul Orndorff didn't agree with that. And that's when Orndorff fired Heenan for the second time. He had actually fired Heenan the first time on Primetime Wrestling, which was a great segment. So Orndorff kind of going babyface a second time. The catalyst just being who's got the better physique. I don't think it resonated with fans, and I'll tell you why. It's because, most wrestling, it's just not something that you can't really get behind that as much, to be honest, and not to dissect the whole angle, but the fans were just not into it, quite honestly. So it just wasn't the best storyline for Orndorff to turn babyface. Orndorff did stick around. Unfortunately, he was left out of WrestleMania 3 Apparently, Orndorff says later, and I believe him, that he was the backup to Andre the Giant in case Andre the Giant couldn't wrestle because of his back injuries. That Orndorff was waiting in the wings as a backup, which is kind of interesting, to Andre. So that just shows you the faith in the company, and also, in my book, the integrity of Paul Orndorff, that he was willing to take that backup position, and really, if anybody could have pulled it off, it would have been Paul Orndorff. Honestly, that would have been a horrible position for any wrestler to be in if it was determined that Andre physically could not get cleared to wrestle or wasn't comfortable with his back. But Orndorff would have done well with it, and he and Hogan would have had a great match had that had happened. I'm not saying it was the plan. It's just something that Orndorff speculated. Orndorff said that he was kept off the card because he was the backup to Andre. It just shows you a lot of respect they had for Orndorff. Of all the guys in the company that could have been a backup, like I said, a tough spot to hold, but who could you put in that position? Bundy, Morocco, who? You know, and then they chose Orndorff as the backup to Andre in case Andre couldn't wrestle because of the back. Smart move on their part, by the way, to have a backup in Orndorff. But unfortunately, he was left off the card, and it would have been nice if they had just given him a little introduction or an interview segment just so we saw him on camera at the show, but they didn't. Typical WWE. So then we move into the, 87. The summer of 87 was another babyface turn, him and Rude. You go to Survivor Series, and it's him versus Rick Rude at this. Him and Rick Rude on opposite sides, and Orndorff once again is teaming up with Hulk Hogan, and attuned, intelligent fans kind of took note of that because here's Hogan and Orndorff on the same side. I believe Orndorff, he wasn't the first guy eliminated. I believe that was Butch Reed. But I think Orndorff and Rude had a little bit of action in that Survivor Series match. Orndorff did not stick around for the end. And I could be wrong, but that might have been his last match in the WWF at that era. I could be wrong. And actually, if that was his last big show, so to speak, obviously, I don't know if he ever competed in WWF again, unless I'm really forgetting something. Because the next thing we saw of Paul Orndorff, 88, 89, I think he just took some time off. There was always, kind of like the Ultimate Warrior, there was always rumors of Paul Orndorff being deceased before he did, because he would go away for stretches. And he went away for a couple of years. I think he did some, I mean, just vaguely say that I think he did some independence, but I'm not really sure what he did, except to say that suddenly he was in WCW, or the NWA, still called that at the time, for the Great American Bash 1990. He's involved in a six-man, actually at a Clash of Champions before that. I think he beat Arn Anderson, believe it or not. They brought him in as a babyface. There was kind of a missing gap of babyfaces when Dusty was gone from the promotion. Dusty Rhodes. So they brought in Paul Orndorff, they brought in JYD, maybe trying to get some buzz from, former WWF guys that had LJN action figures. They brought in Orndorff, he beat Arn on a Clash. I'm doing this all by memory, by the way. The July Great American Bash, 1990 in Baltimore. It's Orndorff, JYD, and Elegante as the Dudes with Attitudes team, taking on Arn, Barry, and Sid. And just, disqualification. And then later on the show, Orndorff's there with the Dudes with Attitudes, like I said, JYD and the others, to help Sting beat Ric Flair. I'm getting emotional here. Then we had, moving forth, Orndorff didn't stick around there forever. He went to Herb Abrams' UWF. I think he was with the UWF, Herb Abrams' version of the UWF, for a couple of years. He was a featured guy. He did not wrestle for their first title. That was Steve Williams versus Bam Bam Bigelow. But Orndorff was right in the mix. I'm trying to think if Orndorff won their title or not. Then I think he showed up in Smoky Mountain Wrestling for Jim Cornette. I could be wrong, but I believe he was Jim Cornette's champion in Smoky Mountain. I haven't seen those tapes. I'd like to see some of those. And apparently, because Orndorff was doing so well in Smoky Mountain, Bill Watts, who was running WCW at the time, gave him a call and said, hey, hey, Cornette, how's Orndorff doing? And Cornette puts Orndorff over, says he's doing great. Bill Watts says, well, I'd like to bring him in. You know, what can we do to make that good for you? Can we give you and your guys a few matches? And basically, Orndorff's excellence and Bill Watts reaching out to Jim Cornette to get Paul Orndorff in WCW was the catalyst for that whole Smoky Mountain Wrestling Heavenly Bodies Rock and Roll Express versus the Heavenly Bodies versus the Rock and Roll Express at Super Clash 3. I was there. I have a video about that. And the match that really stole the show was Paul Orndorff versus Mick Foley. So Paul Orndorff helps really get Mick Foley over as a babyface. They had some type of thing, like a 4-on-4 cage match. It was really kind of blurry, like how they were getting Mick Foley over as a babyface, because they started having this feud between Foley and Orndorff, where the winner got to be like Van Vader's buddy and bodyguard for the world champion Vader. So it was kind of convoluted, but Paul Orndorff and Mick Foley pulled it off, and that match was just a real barn burner, a hell of a good match. If you haven't seen it, might I recommend Super Brawl 3. I don't know if I just said Super Clash 3, that was AWA. Super Brawl 3. Orndorff Foley, I believe it was Falls Count Anywhere. They got the shovel. Some guy on YouTube recently shared a clip of Orndorff suplexing Foley, and the guy didn't understand the spot because it was on the guardrail. But that's what these guys did. They put their bodies on the line. Orndorff sticks around WCW, becomes the world television champion in a tournament. If you've ever seen this 1993 tournament, it's pretty packed with talent. I believe there's Eric Watts, Steve Austin, Barry Windham, Kevin Nash in it. But Paul Orndorff won the thing. So Paul Orndorff becomes the world TV champion in early 93. He had the title for a good 6 or 8 months. And he had some really great matches. And around this time, or if not before, people started noticing this arm situation with Paul Orndorff, where he had this one arm that was kind of smaller than the other, and apparently it was because he tore the triceps or something, some type of arm injury during the Hogan WWF feud. So this arm thing became kind of a signature of Paul Orndorff, and this guy with this great symmetrical physique had this one bad arm. But he still wrestled through it because he was a tough bastard, okay? So then you had Paul Orndorff was the world television champion. I'm trying to remember who he lost to. I think it might have been Steamboat. I'm kind of drawing a blank on who he lost it to. But then they kind of put him with Paul Roma. And a nice tag team, Pretty Wonderful. Pretty Paul Roma and Paul Mr. Wonderful Orndorff. Great tag team. I guess I should go into more details. Going back to that Mick Foley match at Super Brawl 3, just to be there in the arena, you really did feel like you were watching something ahead of its time, and not expecting that Paul Orndorff, who we all kind of knew was the mid-80s WWF, but this is a guy that's been wrestling since like 77, 78. Here he is in 93 having the best match on the card, so give it up. Then we go to the tag team, Pretty Wonderful. I thought it was a great team. Roma certainly did a lot better with Orndorff as his partner than he did with Arn as the horseman, the babyface horseman that didn't work. Roma and Orndorff were really quite good together. Just a time maybe when they didn't have, I wouldn't say they didn't have the best opponents, but they didn't have like the Steiners or anything like that. They had another guy that just passed away from Stars and Stripes, the Patriot, Del Wilkes. So it's unbelievable that, those guys are all reunited in the big ring in the sky. But Pretty Wonderful had 2 World Tag Team title reigns. Eventually, they split them up. Orndorff was still kind of floating around. The first ever Nitro, they had Hulk Hogan against Ray Traylor, another guy that's left us. A great guy, a great wrestler, big boss man, Big Bubba Rogers. I always thought it would have been interesting if they had Hogan versus Orndorff at that first show, that first WCW Nitro. But they didn't. Around the same time, Orndorff had a backstage fight with Vader. That's been well chronicled. I won't go into that too much, but essentially, Orndorff held his own. I guess Orndorff was kind of being segued into a producer role at this point. They tried to use the Orndorff-Vader thing to kind of give Orndorff a little bit of a push. They had him do something, I think the guy's name was Gary Spivey, who was like a motivational guy of some sort at the time, mid-90s, and that just, they had a little skit, I think on a pay-per-view, maybe at Fall Brawl 95, all by memory, folks, of Orndorff working with Gary Spivey, or maybe that was at the Clash around that time. In any event, Orndorff really just kind of, I would say he segued into producing or being a backstage guy pretty well, you know, because they really never had a retirement ceremony for Orndorff. He just kind of became a backstage guy for years. I want to say, did they do something with like Jeff Jarrett years later, where Jeff Jarrett wrestled like 3 guys in one night, like Tito, Snuka, and was Orndorff one of those 3 or not? I don't remember. For some reason, I'm thinking that. I'm trying to think if they put Paul Orndorff in any more segments on camera. I don't think so. I think he was more or less a behind-the-scenes guy for the rest of his run with WCW, and then once WCW goes out of business, the next we really saw of Paul Orndorff. And if you could do one thing today to honor Paul Orndorff, if you want to watch a match, I guess I'd send you to the Mick Foley Super Clash 3 match. And remember, that's Orndorff, probably, he had to be 40 years old at that point. Maybe a little older, maybe a little younger, but something like that. But I mean, just watch the ferocity of Orndorff in that match. Or if you want to watch Hogan versus Orndorff in the cage, you would go to, I believe, October of '86. It actually might have been January of '87, believe it or not, because they were really trying to wrap up the Orndorff-Hogan thing to get Hogan ready for Andre. Maybe it was the January of '87 Saturday Night's Main Event for the cage match. Those are the 2 matches I'd send you for the easy to find stuff. But if you want to see, if you really want to get hardcore, if you're really a hardcore fan, or you're wanting to be an educated, intelligent pro wrestling fan, unlike the masses of idiots out there these days, watch Paul Orndorff's Hall of Fame speech. I believe it was in the, let's say 2004 or 2005 WWF Hall of Fame. I don't know. It's probably on the Peacock or the network if you're in the UK. Orndorff does take his time, so you want to give yourself 45 minutes or so, and some of the guys, Heenan and others, are giving him a hard time, but you can see that Orndorff is almost still working heel at this Hall of Fame speech, which I thought was great. So that's how I think of fucking Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful. I should tell you about another match I saw. Paul Orndorff in a high school gym, just coming into WWF, January of '84. Iron Sheik is the world champion, and a match that I saw live, Paul Orndorff versus B. Brian Blair. Great match. And they also had a great match that was on syndicated TV on WWF, so you can find that. I think it was from St. Louis, but Paul Orndorff and B. Brian Blair, who I believe were real-life friends, had a hell of a great match. And I'm just trying to think if I'm forgetting anything. I'm not sure if Paul Orndorff wrestled in Japan, to be quite honest with you. I wouldn't doubt if he did. And with his athleticism and toughness, I'm sure he did well. I just can't remember hearing about Orndorff in Japan, but I could be wrong. You can leave a comment if you remember or know about that, Orndorff in Japan. I can't remember anything. AWA, I don't think he ever went over to AWA. Georgia National guy, St. Louis guy, WWF guy, NWA, WCW guy, Smoky Mountain guy, top guy, WrestleMania 1, main event, second generation, I believe, of WWF LJN figures that pose, along with a few others, Macho Man, Savage, but Orndorff was probably, Orndorff a couple of years earlier than a guy like Lex Luger. Orndorff, one of the best physiques in the business as far as symmetry, as far as a good 245-pound solid beast. The Brandon Bull, I believe they called him, because he was from Brandon, Florida. I believe he had some type of college, maybe even, I'm not sure if he went pro, but football background. I can't remember off the top. I just remember that nickname, the Brandon Bull, but Mr. Wonderful. The fans would always love to get on Orndorff's back and chant Paula at him. And that's back in the day when you wouldn't have to have a hashtag or a movement about it. If someone called this guy Paula, it was just part of the fun of going to the wrestling show. And Orndorff just fucking worked it. He worked those fans. He manipulated. He loved being a heel. Yeah, he did babyface a few times, but he was a natural-born heel, natural-born charisma, natural-born arrogance, could manipulate the emotions of the audience like very few others. I mean, of that era of 84 to 87, he was definitely a top 10 heel, probably a top 5 heel. I mean, you'd have to put Piper, Orndorff. I mean, that might be it, 1 and 2. Savage comes in strong, but he didn't come in until 86. Bundy, Heenan, if you count Heenan as a heel. I'm a big Morocco fan, but Morocco actually peaked before then. But Nikolai Volkov, Iron Sheik, you get the drift. Was Paul Orndorff in the Goonies video? He might have been. I'm drawing a little bit of a blank if Paul Orndorff was in that Goonies video. He definitely had some moments in the Land of a Thousand Dances video, I'm pretty sure, didn't he? So anyway, Paul Orndorff, my respects. The Brandon Bull, what can you learn from the life of Paul Orndorff? First of all, if you're in top physical shape like a guy like that, and if you're in top mental shape, oh, I got one more last thing. You can have a really long run being a physical, dominant athlete like Paul Orndorff was. And as he mentions when he references Kurt Angle, I mean, you know, Paul Orndorff, just thinking about his life, it's going to motivate me to be a little more athletic today, get back in the gym, drink a power shake, protein shake, and do that type of thing. Paul Orndorff, in Arn Anderson's book, Arn Anderson talks about wrestling in Florida, I guess in 82, and he says that Arn was just starting there in Florida or the continental area, you know, Alabama, working for the Fullers, and Paul Orndorff came up to him and said, "Hey kid, you've been doing some good things, blah, blah, blah. And if you keep your body right, you do your promos, and you watch your money, they can't deny you. Keep your body straight, do your promos right, and keep your money straight. They can't deny you." So that's advice, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, that Orndorff gave to Arn, and I'm giving to you. So Orndorff's wisdom and intelligence lives on. He's a man to be respected. He's a career to be respected, and I respect him. And I think you should too, and I think you should watch the Paul Orndorff Hall of Fame speech, and you should watch the Mick Foley match, and you should watch the Hogan Cage match. And don't just hear me say that and say, "Oh, gee whiz, thanks." Fucking do it. So that's Mike Messier with my Paul Orndorff respects and memorial tribute. Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. I am going to do a Butch Reed tribute. I've been holding off. It was Butch's birthday the other day. But Paul Orndorff, this one's for you. Great wrestler. Great amount of respect for Paul Orndorff. Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. You can see more of things on here. My Ox Baker interview, other tributes to wrestlers, all types of things. Paul Orndorff, rest in peace.